Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my friend Joseph Freymann to talk about his latest book. And well, thank you for coming on, Joseph.
Good to be here.
All right,
Thank you,
well,
Raphael.
before anything else, no, thank you. Let us begin with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, share this video, to do all that good stuff. So yes, we're continuing to promote by the grace of God Catholic intellectualism, which we need, especially in this time of kind of, we can say, confusion and lack thereof. So Joseph has written a really interesting book, and we're going to ask him why he wrote it. Of course, it's called the Summa Apologetica. Yeah, Summa Apologetica, excuse me, Catholic Apologetics and Moral Questions. So he doesn't only deal with doctrinal questions, but also moral questions in a really concise manner. So I'll link to that to get the book in the description below. And Joseph, if you could just talk a little bit about your background and what led you to write this book, interesting book. And just for my viewers, make time to read. Let these videos just be a little motivation for you to get into the books. Don't just stick to the videos. But go ahead, Joseph, if you can chime in here.
Sure. Thank you, Raphael. So, just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I lived there until until I finished high school. And then I basically traveled all over the states and several different countries, getting my education. I have a master's in philosophy, a master's in theology. I've really been a lifelong scholar, and I'm currently both a teacher and a professor of philosophy and apologetics. And how I got into apologetics really had a lot to do with where I grew up, because the state of Hawaii is a beautiful place, but one challenge there is it's very pluralistic. There's a bit of everything, every kind of race you can imagine, every kind of ethnicity, and every kind of religion. So even though I went to a Catholic school, there were many students there who were not Catholic, and some of them were quite hostile to the faith. And from a young age, I was challenged. I would be asked questions, and sometimes even ridiculed for beliefs. And so what that did is it actually had a positive effect in me. It didn't make me doubt my faith. It just made me really want to study it and find out the answers to these questions, which at the time I simply wasn't prepared to answer. So I've really been studying apologetics and philosophy since I was probably 14. And that's really the reason why I've written this book, because as a longtime teacher of the subject, I've noticed over the years that there are many good books on apologetics and by very good authors, but there isn't a textbook where it's like a one-stop shop, a
Right.
place it's divided into units and chapters and sections, and then at the end of every chapter there is a list of study questions, there's illustrations, something that teachers can use to structure their course. And I kind of did some research, into this area, and was really curious, why hasn't a book been published? And there were two published about 100 years ago. So Catholic Apologetics, our high school course, was published by Father John Lau in 1927. And
Right.
another one similar, Apologetics and Catholic Doctrine, by Bishop Michael Sheehan, published in 1917. But the reason that one hasn't been written since then is because around Vatican II, perhaps even a little before that, apologetics, which used to be taught in the high schools and the seminaries, was no longer taught. The focus was now on ecumenism, and
Right.
let's all get along, and let's find our common ground and just love Jesus. And there's something to be said for ecumenism, but not at the expense of apologetics. So the school where I teach, so I teach at a Catholic Classical Academy in the Los Angeles area where I live.
Mhm.
We do teach apologetics, and I do believe that the number of schools that are including it in their curriculum is growing, and that's why I've written this book, to give those teachers a good useful tool.
Yeah, I think it's spot on with this false Irenicism, as I think you would say it in
Yeah.
English, that John Paul II actually talked about. So yeah, this kind of like this lack of militancy, that we're the
Uh-huh.
church militant, so we kind of need to go out there and really evangelize using the apologetics. So I love it, as you separated. Well, the first part of the Summa Apologetica is natural apologetics, and that's spot on in the sense that we really need, to be a theologian, you have to be rooted in philosophy. You see that in your work. So why do you kind of start with that? If you can just elaborate on that a little bit. First, natural apologetics, then you jump into Christian apologetics.
Sure. Yeah. Related to your question is really the nature and role of philosophy and theology. I like to I like to compare it to math and science. Especially physics. You when you study physics, the language of it is math. And in fact, in every physics course, there's going to be certain math prerequisites because if you don't have the math background, you won't understand the physics. Well, I think there's a great analogy there with philosophy and theology. The language of theology is philosophy, and you need human reason and the concepts of metaphysics and logic and epistemology in order to make sense of the doctrines and precepts of theology. So the reason why I start with that in my book is because um, even though this is not a philosophy course, I want the students to have some kind of grounding in metaphysics, in logic, in epistemology, on which to base all the rest of the lessons in apologetics. So we start with some philosophy, then we talk about natural apologetics, which is how we would dialogue with non-believers, because the first step in religion, of course, is does God exist, and what are some objections to that existence? And then building on that, we go into Christian apologetics, which is how we would dialogue with people that do believe in God, but not in Jesus. And then finally, I'd say probably more than half of the book is about Catholic apologetics, how we as Catholics would dialogue with Christians who share our faith in Christ, but differ with us on other doctrines.
That's right. And yeah, I mean, there's other ways also to do apologetics, which you have towards the end of your book, historical apologetics, and even in the moral aspect. So yeah, it's really, since God is the author and God is truth himself, all these other sources to arrive at the truth come from God. So it's beautiful how, as a Catholics, we can just use these. But just to show how thorough, even though you deal with the themes basically of all the faith, but again, in a very concise and succinct manner. But just to show, like, for the existence of God, you talk about, again, because you're in the scientific field. So you talk about fine tuning, which is fascinating. You even talk about the Kalam argument for the existence of God, which is, outside of Catholic tradition, Muslim, I believe it's the Islamic
That's
proof
correct.
of God. And you even go into mathematics there. So really, I think it's the way the author, which is you're coming at it in a very scientific way, and I think that's very important. That's awesome. So,
Thank you.
is there anything that kind of inspired you to write it, or basically, well, you said that already, but what kind of said, well, I got to write this. Like, this is something that is, you know, I gotta, and basically, if you could tell us if it took you a long time, because this is a thick book, and I always like to say that. It's like 400 pages, which is good for Summa one volume. But I always say, I had a professor who said, if a book stands on its own, it's a good book, right? If a book falls over, that's how you test if a book is good or not. So this book for sure passes that test. I don't have the physical book, I have the digital book. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit about when you were writing it, what kind of, or if there's any setbacks what, um, or what parts did you have any issue with certain parts? Did you have to consult, or how did you go about actually writing this book? Because again, there's a lot in there.
Yes. So I guess I could say that the book started the book started decades ago, in that ever since I was 14, with this zeal to find out the answers to the questions that I was being asked. I've been kind of like I've been a collector, right? I find out a good argument, I write it down. Then another one, and just doing this for decades, which led up to, I had some good material to teach my course with. But I never really set out to write a book until something happened. I'd say probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I had some former students that had taken my apologetics course, and they had gone on to college, and some, to the workplace. And when they ran into me a few years after, they said, Mr. Freymann, your course helped me so much, and it really helped me to keep my faith. But when I was challenged, I would kind of know the answer, but I wouldn't have the particular gospel verse memorized, or I wouldn't know if it came from First Corinthians or from Ephesians. And so I didn't hold up well when I talked with Protestants who knew their Bible better. So that got me thinking. I thought to myself, I'd like there to be some kind of reference, like a pocket reference, for these students to use in live conversations, so that even though they haven't memorized the Bible, and maybe in an ideal world they should, but the next best thing is to have it with them at all times. So 2 years ago, I launched a mobile app. So my background's in computer science, and so I launched a mobile app that's available for iPhone and Android, and it's called Apologetics with two P's, Apologetics. And the reason I made it is because these students obviously carry their phones with them, just like everyone that age does.
Mm.
And I'm really happy to report that it has served them in live conversations. The Mormon missionary comes to the door, and my student just whips out the phone, does a quick keyword search, Mormons, and then has all the Bible verses laid out in bold print,
Oh, that's
so that
awesome.
they can quote the Bible to the Bible thumping, Protestant
Right.
or Mormon or Jehovah's Witness. Other people reported back and say, oh, well, my college roommate was on me about the Eucharist, and I just took out my phone and I was able to answer the argument. So I guess what I'm saying as an answer to your question is, I didn't really set out to write the book. I wanted to just create something to help my students. And since the app had all the content in one place, then the logical next step was, all right, well, maybe let's turn that into a book, because we don't have a good textbook for apologetics. So I'd say that the process of research and collecting arguments has really been 2 or 3 decades. But the process of writing the app was 2 years,
Mhm.
and then another 2 years after that to do the book.
Do you use the book in your classroom?
I do.
Oh, wow.
Yes. In fact, the book, everything that's in the book is from what I teach in class. So like some of the PowerPoints that I go through in my lectures at class in class are really identical to the book content.
Teachers write the best books because I mean you're really I mean you feed all you learn so much. You learn more teaching than I always said than even than as a student.
You
So
really do.
it's really incredible. It's funny because I just did an interview with Jesse Romero, and he wrote a book on
Yes.
One Lord. His book is One Lord, One Faith, One Church. And he says, I don't
Yes.
get into the details. He basically just proves how Christ, he gives evidence for how Christ founded the church. But he says, I don't give the breakdown, but your book is like, it's perfect that I'm doing your interview afterwards because your book is like the breakdown of his book because he doesn't get into the very particulars, um, which you do. So it's, again, a very, very, very good succession, we can say. How would you say? Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I don't mean to cut
Good.
you off.
No,
It's
no, no.
just it's
Please.
it's interesting though that you mention him, because this is maybe a happy coincidence or providence. I just attended his conference that he gave at my parish in Los Angeles, because his brother is the director of RCIA at my parish, and so Jesse came and gave a talk to the parish, which I attended. He gave me a signed copy of his book. I gave him a signed copy of my book, and he's going to write the foreword for my second edition.
Oh wow, I got to tell him because that's I just interviewed him like an hour ago. So that's hilarious. I wish I would have told him. Yeah, I had no idea there was a connection. Small world, huh? As they say.
Yeah, small world.
That's So what do you think about the do you think there's a diminishing of there's definitely hope in the horizon I see But in apologetics, you do see this kind of, and as you mentioned in Vatican II, kind of like this diminishing in the value of apologetics. And as you mentioned, Father John Lau, which is that's long written long ago. I used that as in my Sunday school um, for apologetics, because you're right, it's hard to find a good book. Do you think it's something that is kind of incrementally growing up in value? And what do you think the effects are of really not valuing apologetics? Like what are what are consequences of that?
Yeah. So first of all, yes, I do think that there's a momentum in the area of more awareness of apologetics, of trying to learn it, trying to teach it. I really do think that started with the advent of Catholic Answers. Catholic Answers um, was the force behind apologetics in the 80s and 90s, thanks to Carl Keating. And then we have great guys like Patrick Madrid, Trent Horn that have kind of mainstreamed apologetics. And then we have these schools that are popping up everywhere. These new classical academies and the Chesterton academies.
That's
They do teach apologetics. So I really do feel there is a growing awareness of the need for apologetics. But to answer the second part of your question, yeah, I think there are serious consequences to not studying it. Um, I've known some people who were strong in their faith in high school and went to a good Catholic high school, but then when they went to college and talked to people who challenged their faith, at first they were strong, but little by little they fell away, and now they most of them don't even go to church, and the some of them just don't even believe in God. So I do think that's a direct result of never having taken an apologetics course in their lives. I feel it's vital for us to give kids the tools, the weapons they need to defend themselves.
right, right. No, that's one of the parts I find really fascinating in the book is the historical apologetics. Could
Mhm.
you briefly kind of explain how that because you deal with a lot in that, and it's what is kind of what are you trying to do basically in that unit?
Yes, what I'm trying to do in that unit is I'm trying to debunk all the anti-Catholic myths
Right,
because we're surrounded by those. I remember this was a long time ago. It was this movie that was popular at the time, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It was Kevin Costner. It came out in like the early 90s.
right,
And one thing that Robin Hood in that movie says, he's talking about how people are going to defend their land, and how a soldier who's defending his land will fight 10 times harder than someone who's trying to take over someone else's land. And then his comment after that was, "Oh, and the Crusades taught me that." I'm like, obviously, what he's assuming is that the Crusaders were trying to conquer land from peaceful Muslims. It's a false narrative.
yeah,
It's a false narrative. It ignores the facts of history. So the whole point of having the historical apologetics section in my book is to try to help students debunk these false histories that are out there. One of my primary sources there that I use is this great historian Rodney Stark. I love the guy because he's Jewish, he's not Catholic, and yet most of his books defend the church against anti-Catholic versions of history. The Black Legend, right? The Black Legend, which was made popular by English propagandists. What does it paint a picture of? An ignorant, oppressive church that just slaughtered Muslims in the Crusades, tortured and burned people in the Inquisitions, oppressed the indigenous when they found the New World and colonized it, and all these false narratives, which are pretty mainstream. Most people that I run into kind of believe that that's how history went down. So what I'm trying to do in my book is, look, these are the facts. You can make your own judgment, but you should know what the historical facts are before you spout off these false narratives.
yeah. That's you're seeing a wave of scholarship, modern or contemporary scholarship that are debunking a lot of these black legends. Why do you think that
Yeah.
is in academia, mainstream academia? Like I'm thinking, for example, Oxford Press, some these
Uh-huh.
books you use that are very common to use in universities, and they promote among other publishers, they promote these really superficial, not based on history legends. Why do you think they're so, uh, and I noticed that in your historical apologetics you do that, but why do you think is this mainstream superficial, these works in academia have this such an anti-Catholic spirit?
Yes. I've pondered that question for a long time. I'm glad you asked it. I really feel that the the underlying reason for that is that people hate the church. And the reason they hate the church is because what it stands for, of what it stands for. The church stands for pro-life values. The church is against abortion and euthanasia. The church stands for, equality, but understood in the correct sense. It stands for, solidarity of peoples. It's against communism in its principles. So I guess to answer your question, what I feel like is that since there's a deep hatred of the church and what it stands for, there's this motivation to make the church look bad, right?
Right.
Because if we make the church look good, then the consequences that people will, follow the Catholic Church or at least be sympathetic to its teachings. So I really feel it's a war, it's a battle right now that we're fighting in the culture. It really is a war between good and evil. And I know Jesse Romero may have touched on that because it's a big theme with him. He and I have talked about it. There really is a war going on, and these historians who like to promote false narratives, deep down inside, I believe they hate the Catholic Church.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely a supernatural, preternatural causes for sure,
I
because it
think
really
I think
makes
so.
sense. There's no logical explanation on the targeting of Catholicism, which is, I guess, is another apologetics. We can use that as apologetics itself. So that's
Uh-huh.
definitely a reason to show the true Church of Christ. Another question is, how's morality apologetics? And someone might ask, um, how can the moral teaching of Catholicism, convince someone? Even though I do know someone who has converted because of the moral teachings, but in general, what would you say to someone who because I teach morality in a high school level, and
Uh-huh.
uh, I mean, the pushback I get is insane. So how would morality be? How do you relate those two, morality as apologetics?
Yeah. So, classically speaking, in theology, there are different branches, and there's dogmatic theology, moral theology, and so moral apologetics is usually not considered a subject. But the reason I added it to the book is because I find that a lot of times the questions people have are more about morals than they are about doctrine.
Oh, for sure.
you know there are people who are perhaps willing to dialogue about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the papacy and Mary and things like that, but when you talk about birth control or abortion or euthanasia, capital punishment, things like that, that's when they get really defensive. And so I guess my idea behind the term moral apologetics is we need to give the historical and scriptural and logical arguments to defend Catholic moral theology from mainstream morality, which is often contrary to Catholic moral theology. So yeah, I guess that would be the idea behind putting those two terms together, moral and apologetics. Questions that I get even in day to day life from family members, from friends who aren't Catholic. I found that most of those questions have to do with morality, and
Oh
and
yeah.
and far fewer have to do with doctrine.
No, that's
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, obviously, morality has negative aspects, prohibitions, but really the positive aspect of morality is for us to be in the image of God. And someone who is sincere and of goodwill, I think through the grace of God, they can see that, wow, this order within morality can really bring someone to the truth. I know of a woman who converted to Catholicism because of the sexual teaching of she thought it was so magnificent, it was so ordered, and the social doctrine of the church too, because really a lot of the principles that even are used in the secular world, like subsidiarity, solidarity, these come from Catholic morality, Catholic social
Uh-huh.
teaching, and they track people of goodwill, right? Using reason, by God's grace, so they can say, wow, this is where the truth is, right? By the fruits you know
Uh-huh.
the tree. And it's really I really appreciate you adding that part there. I was really, I didn't know there was morality there until I mean I heard of the book from Dr. Mahfoud, who told me about the book, and I just thought it was purely doctrinal. But then when I saw the moral aspect, I was like, wow, this is really great. So then the last part is on, well, before the appendices, but the Christian sects and non-Christian religions.
Yes.
General questions. If you can expand a little bit on that, so if some of the viewers are interested in any particular ones, what is in that unit?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, there are so many things that could be said about other religions, and they're fascinating. Hinduism is fascinating, and Islam and Judaism. But you know, my objective in that part of the book isn't to give an exhaustive exposure of what they believe, exhaustive summary, but rather to give my students the salient points of each of the world's major religions. I don't have Judaism there just because, you know, my students are, it's a Judeo-Christian background. You know, most people that I found, they know what Judaism's about.
Right.
But there's a lot of ignorance about Islam, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. So I do outline their basic teachings. I also outline a few, you know, quick Catholic responses to some of those different groups' objections to Catholicism, such as, you know, the 144,000 of Jehovah's Witnesses, only those will be saved, or you know, the prohibition against eating blood that Jehovah's Witnesses have, or the Mormons' theology and eschatology. So I do have a few apologetic responses to Mormons and Seventh-day Adventists, but mainly my intention is to give students a summary of what they believe, just so that they know what they're up against.
Right.
And then the general questions part, which is the very last part of the book, that's really where you said a few minutes ago that that teachers write the best books. Well, why is that? Because you and I and teachers who are in the classroom, we're constantly getting asked questions by our students, right? Every single day. And so in the general questions area, I have questions that I've been asked over the years that I think a lot of other students would have. So I put those in there too.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's excellent. I mean, it's really an answer to, I mean, because we experience, what people are asking, so it's really an answer to that. That's awesome. So I just want to ask you, in the last section, you add articles. If you could explain that in one of the appendix, you add articles.
Uh,
Are those are your written articles, I believe, right? You wrote for the Register, or
That's right. Yeah. So the articles that I included in the appendix are they're actually all articles that I wrote, but the reason I have them in the appendix is because in the body of the textbook, for some of the questions that I answer, I'll refer to those articles for, like, you know, further reading type thing. The articles in the appendix are optional if a teacher is using this book in his or her course. But I have them there because sometimes students want to read the full text of something that I might mention in class. But yeah, the appendix articles are all things that I wrote.
all right. So where do you go from here? I mean, do you think any other future projects, or
Well, you
this
know,
just came out, or because out
it
of
just came out.
it
It,
just
it
came out?
just
Okay, that's right.
just came out a
That's
couple
right.
of months. It came out. It came out in late October, so it hasn't been out very long. My immediate project is to finish the second edition. I should have that done by June or July, and I'm also trying to get the word out because, you know, really my goal is to have all the schools in the country that are faithful to the church and do teach apologetics. I want them to use this textbook, you know, and I want every Catholic out there to have my app on his phone. I, I believe that, you know, from the age of 14, God has kind of put this desire in my heart to collect apologetics arguments. And I want to now put those at the service of the church and let other people benefit from it. And then the other thing I'm working on just immediately, I'm trying to get it done by the end of this week, is the Spanish version. So the app that I published 2 years ago is bilingual. All the content is in Spanish, and all you have to do is, you know, click a button and you change the language. So I am currently finishing the Spanish version of Summa Apologetica, and I have a printing house in Mexico lined up. So I want to sell it in Mexico because, unfortunately, there are many cultural Catholics there without a good formation who are falling prey to Mormon missionaries and Jehovah's Witnesses. They're dropping like flies.
That's
So
right.
I want to give them some tools. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's common there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, great. Yeah, we'll put. Do you have a website, or just give me the name of the app? I'll put it in the description. Do you have your own website by any chance?
Yes.
You do. Okay.
Yes. So I have a website and I have a YouTube channel. Should
Oh,
I mention both right now? Okay.
yes, please.
So the website, the purpose of the website is just to channel people to the app in the book. And simple domain name is just apologetics.net. And so APP, play on words, right? APPOLOGETICS.net. And then my YouTube channel is also of the same name. It's just Apologetics 2Ps. The YouTube channel has my entire course in video format in different sections, and that's really the same content as my book, but in video form. So yeah, I mean, I'd love for people to subscribe to the channel as well.
Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, this has been great. I will put the description. Get the book. It's definitely worth it, and even as a reference. I mean, if you don't read it through, which is good to read, obviously to learn your faith, you can have it as a reference whenever you need to kind of, because we always need to, especially living in this pluralistic society. There's definitely, as you mentioned before, the letter of Peter, we have to give a reason for our faith for people
Yeah,
to ask. And if we don't know, so there has to be that intellectual side, obviously culminating in the will, the love. But if we don't know, you can't love what you don't know, basically. So yeah,
totally.
appreciate what you do, and I'll give you last word if you want to say anything to the viewers. I would hope to have you on in the near future again, but anything that comes up, or maybe we could talk something about apologetics. But please, last word if you want to say something to the viewers.
Yeah, so I guess my last word is, to encourage people to study their faith. And what I mean by that is, I meet a lot of good Catholics who love Jesus, and that's great, and they practice their faith. But there aren't that many who actually take time to study it. Now, this is preaching to the choir because most of the people who watch your content are really active, and you yourself are obviously. But I'm just hoping that those who watch this video now will encourage their contacts to also study the faith, because as you just said, we can't love what we don't know, and the more we know about God, the more we'll love Him. They really just feed each other. Love and knowledge feed each other. So yeah, I kind of echo what you say. This we need to study our faith. We're living in a battle right now. It's a battle of good versus evil, and we Catholics, we Christians, we are the soldiers. We're the ones fighting the battle. We're the ones who are going to be attacked. We have to be well equipped and well armed soldiers, and that's what apologetics is about.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, have you on again soon. Again.
Thank you,
And
Raphael.
yeah. All right. God bless you all, and thank you for watching. Take care.